and welcome to the Allegory Story Podcast. My name is Melanie Nevis.
And I'm Tegan Aline.
And today we are going to be talking about probably one of the most famous figures in Slavic folklore.
Ooh.
Any guesses? Well, actually, you already know who
I don't want to guess because I know who we're already going to talk about. But do you, the audience, do you have any guesses? Slavic folklore.
Yeah, she's often depicted as a supernatural, bony old crone with long teeth who lives deep in the forest.
Bony old crone.
In a magical house perched on chicken legs, which is a dead giveaway, surrounded by glowing skulls. And sometimes,
who else do you know that has a house with chicken legs coming out of the bottom?
Sometimes she flies around in a giant mortar using the pestle to guide and steer her.
Oh, seriously? I didn't know that.
Yeah. And so any guesses? Baba Yaga.
Yay, Baba Yaga! I just very much enjoy saying that name, Baba Yaga. Oh, is it one of those things where you shouldn't say it 3 times into a mirror? I don't know. I saw that on a show. I think that's not an accurate
That's
depiction.
Bloody Mary.
Right. Okay, yeah. I'm getting things mixed up. It's all the lines are blurred. The lines are blurred.
That's Bloody Mary. Although we could totally do something on that and La Llorona.
I'd rather not. I don't know. That still kind of spooks me out. I guess it's back from my childhood days, but this kind of scares me. My thing about the one thing, and I told you about this before we decided to do this recording, was the one thing that drives me nuts about Baba Yaga is the reference of that name in the John Wick series.
Yeah.
I'm going to put it out before we get into the stories, but I just want to say I have no idea why they decided to name John Wick's character Baba Yaga. I understand the Eastern reference, but that other than that, what's the point? Because it's a woman. It's a totally different.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Anyways.
There's a bunch of stuff about this, but basically he's kind of like the Russian boogeyman, I guess. So the name is a reference to the Baba Yaga, which reflects John's history with the mob.
Right.
Although it's misinterpreted as a Russian boogeyman.
It's absolutely misinterpreted, I think.
That's the most that I could find. It's really shit. It's 100%.
Yeah.
What do you know?
What I know about Baba Yaga?
Yeah, no,
but
go
it's
ahead.
good.
What were you
Who cares? Who cares? John Wick, that was dumb. I love the movies, but don't do that again. Okay. Anyways. That's all we need to say about that. What do I know about Baba Yaga? Not much. The things that I know are what you said, that she's kind of like a crone type witch, so older. She's kind of depicted as scary and maybe malevolent, a bad spirit. I know that she has a house that has 2 chicken legs underneath it, and it runs around, kind of like Howl's Moving Castle, but different. And that's pretty much what I know. I know very little about her folklore, but I'm very interested because you don't see many folklores around that kind of style of witch.
You mentioned Howl's Moving Castle, but in Spirited Away, the bathhouse proprietor is actually kind of modeled a little after Baba Yaga.
That totally tracks. I
Right?
see that. I see that so hard. I love that character so much, and I'm so obsessed with her nose and the lines on her face, and it's all very interesting. But yeah, I get what you're saying. I could see that for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And like I was saying, she doesn't fly around on a broom. She flies around in a mortar and uses the pestle to guide her when she's flying.
That's cool. That's so cool. But I wonder why that. Those are really heavy. How does it fly? That's a stupid joke. but why a motor and pestle?
I tried to figure out why, and I couldn't really find anything on the why. I think maybe it's just I don't know, I don't know. I feel like that was something that was used. That was a tool that was frequently used at the time.
Yeah, that's what I was
in
just
the area of
too.
the world that in the Slavic area of the world where it kind of started. And she's got room to kind of move around in the mortar. Like it's a little more comfortable than a broom if you're an old lady. I don't know.
Maybe you should explain what that is quickly, just because, like, unless you're, like, really into food and you love grinding up spices like we do, but not everybody does. Maybe you don't even know what that is.
A mortar is like a bowl, and it's often you can get it. Some people have wooden mortars. I prefer mine to be made of granite or marble, like a hard stone.
Yeah, I have a stone one
And
as well.
yeah, and then it is a little rough on the inside so that when you put spices in there and you use your pestle to grind the spices.
It's a manual grinder, basically. It's basically like the old school like, before you ground spices with, like, a machine, or even, like, I know that in Italy, they make, pesto with
Mhm,
the
with a mortar
mortar
and
and
pestle.
pestle, and, basically it's basically like the original, it's kind of like an early way of being able to grind and kind of mix things together to
Mhm,
really, like, pull their flavors out. But I guess, if you're using different spices or different herbs and you want to pull something, like, out of it, that would be a manual hand tool that you would use. And
yeah.
like, in terms of food, the flavor is really good. That's why people still use it to this day.
Well, yeah,
um
because if you grind spices fresh from a whole seed or whatever,
mm.
as opposed to getting something pre-ground, it's just gonna be way more flavorful.
Kind of unrelated, but my favorite thing to do in the kitchen, it's like my secret, actually. I probably shouldn't be telling it, but I'm going to tell it anyway. Is I love toasting cumin and then putting
Mm,
it in my mortar and pestle and grinding it, and then it just, like,
yeah.
like cumin seeds, and then it just, like, opens up that flavor so hardcore, and I put it in everything, and people are always like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "It's
Cumin is
toasted cumin."
such a good flavor.
It's
Such a good
incredible.
flavor.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So that would be fun. I would love to fly around in one of those.
Yeah, it'd be cool, right?
Yeah.
So, I didn't really know a whole lot about her either. And
Mm,
that's why I'm very intrigued. Like I know that she lives in this wild, crazy house, and I remember going to Burning Man
such a
one
cool
year, and that was
house.
actually one of the installations
Oh, really?
was a Baba Yaga house, which was really, really cool. And it was on chicken legs, and you could go up into it.
Wow.
And yeah, it was really
Interesting.
cool. It was very, very cool. Um, but she's often, I think, seen as this really sinister. Like that's the impression that I would get. Would that be she'd be like really scary and sinister? I don't
Yeah, kind
know.
of like the classical depiction of a old evil witch, kind of, right?
Yeah, I
Mhm.
think so. And so like there's a lot of tales of her exploits, and they vary, but typically, upon doing research, she typically does three things. She either helps, imprisons, or eats people.
Oh, she eats people.
Usually children.
Is this like, I just heard Calypso in the background go, like, no.
Yeah.
Is that where I don't want to jump ahead. I don't want to jump ahead. I'll try to remember this question for later. I'm wondering if that relates to other myths. Witches that eat people and eat children, like Hansel and Gretel. Like, is there a connection there?
Like La Voisin. Well, she doesn't eat them. She just kills them a lot.
She was just killing them. Yeah, she wasn't
She just
eating
kills them a
them.
lot. Um,
Why eat them when you have French food to eat? She cackles into the mic. That was a funny joke. Anyway, sorry.
okay, so yeah, basically across folklore and sometimes within a single story, the Baba Yaga shifts between being a very maternal helper to being
Hmm.
a cannibalistic villain. So she's a very
Interesting.
complicated, multifaceted character, and she is kind of like the personification of death, but is also regarded as having a really important role in relation to fertility and fate. So she's this complex manifestation of origin myths and shifting cultural anxieties, I think, because
Hmm.
the
Yeah, that
Baba
makes sense.
Yaga, yeah, the earliest written record of the Baba Yaga is only in 1755
Oh.
as part of a discourse on Slavic folk figures in Mikhail Lomonosov. Try that again.
It's hard. Why did we decide to do this with all of these names?
I don't know.
Sometimes I ask myself that.
Mikhail Lomonosov's book, Russian
Hmm.
Grammar, a book on Russian grammar. And before that, she appeared in woodcut art from the 17th century and then
Ooh,
kind of
that's
made
interesting.
regular, yeah, and then she made regular appearances in books of Russian fairy tales and folklore. But
Right.
she's relatively recent.
In a way,
You know,
yeah.
we've been talking about goddess witches that are like really, really old, but
But I
she's
feel like
relatively
the
recent.
wood carvings might give way to an idea of like a verbal like storyline that's like passed down maybe that's not written.
That That's
Yeah,
just
sorry.
it. Yeah. No, no, no. That's just it. That's 100% true. Like we have,
Mhm.
so that's the earliest written version, but even with Perrault recording or writing things down, or Jean Baptiste writing things down, these are still all oral tales. So the
Yeah.
origins of Baba Yaga go back way further than the 17th century. In ancient
Hmm.
Slavic beliefs, there were three planes of existence. So there's the middle world, where we experience life as we know it. So we live in the middle world.
Okay.
The upper world, which all deities call home. And then the lower world, which is a mystical realm of earthly delights where plant spirits, power animals, and mythical beings reside. And Baba Yaga makes her domain in
Oh,
the lower
interesting.
world, where she
Oh.
communes with these magical creatures. So if you think of the lower world as the spirit world,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
then her ease of traversing between the middle world and the lower world kind of underlines her role as a mediator between the living and the dead.
Right. Okay. Do you have to be dead to be in the lower world?
Well, it's
No.
a spirit world, so I think so. It's like magical, mystical creatures and spirits.
And in this context, spirits can't go into the upper world. That's just for like the high
That's
level.
just for deities.
Yes. Okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. So
Interesting.
like you commune with the mystical. Yeah, it's interesting, right?
The lower world sounds cooler, to be honest.
I
It sounds
know.
cool.
I 100% agree.
Yeah. I
I
wanna hang out there.
100% agree. I'm like power animals and all this stuff. That sounds awesome.
That's very
So,
interesting.
some scholars believe that she may have originally been a Slavic goddess of death and earth mother known as Yaga Baba.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Others say
Interesting.
she's a Slavic analog of the Greek deity Persephone. So, if you remember, Persephone is this
Right.
goddess of spring and nature, also goddess of the underworld.
Yeah.
And others argue that she was initially the personification of nature, which can be cruel
Mm,
or kind.
right.
And she's often associated with woods and forests and like the wilderness of nature.
Here we go again. Oh,
Yeah, there's
wow.
there's no single interpretation of her origin that's universally agreed upon. And
Okay.
the same is actually kind of true of her name. So when you hear Baba Yaga, what do you think?
Well, I think it's really interesting, that we're seeing with her with Baba Yaga, and we've seen in other stories that we've explored in this season, this connection between Earth and death. Because I
Mhm.
think, like often in our society today, we think of Earth as life, and it's always life, but we're also more disconnected from Earth than we have been in a long time. And the reality is, there is tons of death that comes with nature
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
everywhere. So I think it's very interesting that we keep seeing this kind of story in wrapped up into a particular deity. But it sounds really, really, really interesting, and it feels like it makes a lot of sense in terms of Baba Yaga being this maternal mother figure, and then also being like connected to the death rite and things like that. Yeah, that's interesting. That's cool.
I think that with you living in the countryside as well, and like correct me if I'm wrong, but I think
No,
that
you're
since
right.
you've moved out there, you have had a lot more experience in dealing with death
Death
and
on every
seeing
corner.
death
Death
a
on
lot
every
more.
corner. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, in the city, we might see it occasionally, but we have people that come and clean roadkill regularly, and like
Yeah, we don't
we're
have that
just
here.
a little more buffered and sheltered from it. And if you
Yeah.
live out of a city, you are much more likely to see it on a regular basis, and not even necessarily as the result of human interference, because that's a lot of the reason that things die in the city is because of humans.
Yeah, no, here it's like literal nature just kind of like doing its thing. It's true because I was born and raised in the city. And living out here the last, I think, 3 or 4 years now has been the first time I've fully ever lived out in this outside rurally. And we live quite in a rural place, like to the point where if you're driving home at a certain hour, you'll see like a pack of like 8 wild boar like crossing the road and going off into the forest, or you'll see foxes and all foxes, fox. Anyway, you'll see a lot of different animals around here. But in the same way, you'll also see a lot. I've seen some pretty gruesome things. I won't get into it, but you see a lot of death of animals around here too. The nicest
Yeah.
story I have is that Lena spent a week bringing home bones of a fox to us. Like she didn't kill the fox; she just found the bones
Oh,
like after the whole body had been decayed.
yeah, yeah, I remember you showing me the skull
Yeah,
it's
we
on your
kept the
shelf.
skull.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We kept
Mhm.
the skull because it was really beautiful, like, we cleaned it and everything, we kept that, but she also brought home the hips and the rib cage and we
Yeah.
didn't wanna keep the whole thing, so, we didn't. But yeah, it was like a week practice, and that was, like, when we first moved out here, and it was
You're
really
like, "Oh gosh,
yeah,
how
what
long?"
have I done? Yeah, but it really what it did give me exactly what you're saying is like that
Mhm.
sense of nature being kind of like it can be an unruly thing in a lot of ways, you
Mhm.
know. And even, just we have an owl also living in the barn, and seeing the stuff the owl leaves around, it sounds majestic and beautiful, and I love owls, but like seeing the real life of that owl is like day and night from what I perceive as like an owl in terms of
Oh, yeah,
like
they regurgitate the little bones of stuff that they eat, and yeah,
yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
yeah.
And they're all upstairs in the barn over top my husband's workshop. So, yeah, yeah, exactly. So I totally get what you're saying, and I agree
Yeah.
1000%. Yeah.
Let's get back to the name itself, Baba Yaga.
Mhm.
When you hear the name Baba Yaga, is there a specific word
Oh.
that comes to mind, or like
Oh, I
specific
didn't
things
know,
that come
sorry,
to
I didn't
mind?
realize you're asking me about the name itself. Baba reminds me of, like papa, like or like a grandparent's name. I don't know
Yeah,
why. But
babushka.
Yaga, I don't
That's
know.
why.
Yes,
Babushka.
babushka. Yes.
Babushka.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the one. Yeah, it reminds me
The
of that.
Russian word for grandmother's babushka. And that's kind of
Mhm.
one theory of where Baba kind of comes from. So it could also refer to a midwife, a sorceress, or a fortune teller. The standard word for it is babushka, but, and here's the interesting thing, Baba in modern Russian is a pejorative term for women or a woman.
It's a say sorry, can you say that again?
It's it's a pejorative term for a woman. So a
Oh.
pejorative term. Do you know what that means?
No.
Okay, that's okay. It means that it expresses contempt or disapproval.
Oh,
So,
so it's like
oh,
an insult. It can be.
yeah, yeah.
Really?
In modern Russian, apparently, this is what I've read in like some scholarly articles and stuff. But apparently, Baba in modern Russian is also a pejorative term for woman, which is
Interesting.
interesting.
That's weird. But is that why, because of her, that becomes that way, or it was like that before?
That
Chick
I would have to,
Chicken or
like,
the
go
egg? We don't
into the
know.
etymology of it a little bit
Yeah,
more.
yeah.
It's all, like, it's a little convoluted. Um, but yeah, so it could refer to midwife, sorceress, and fortune teller. It's also a derivative of babushka, which is just, like, a really fun word to say,
I was trying
which
so
means
hard not to
grandmother,
laugh. Oh,
you
sorry,
know,
what does it mean?
which means grandmother. It's the Russian word
Grandmother.
for grandmother is babushka.
I was trying so hard not to laugh while we were talking about it, just because there was like during COVID, there was a social media trend of babushka. and it was like young girls dressing up like babushka, and so it was like dressed like I think when you think of babushka in the typical sense, you think of like the scarf wrapped
Yeah.
around the head and
Yep.
like a kind of like a granny dressed in all
Yep.
black, like with a
Totally.
cane. So they
Yeah.
were dressing like that, but like with big lips, and they would just like turn around really quick and be like babushka, and it was like this whole thing play on words, and it was really, really funny. So I was trying not to laugh at that because like that's what it reminds me of, but I realized it's kind of like a serious thing, but that moment in social media history was funny.
um, the origin for the word yaga is a little bit more obscure, and it's a lot of linguists have come up with different interpretations, but
Mm.
as a whole, like yaga, like it can include disease, illness, horror, chill. It's been linked to like wicked wood nymph, witch, evil woman,
Wow.
rage, fury, anger, torture. Like linguists are very perplexed by this, and it could be derived from a lot of these different things. But
Mm.
ultimately, now Baba Yaga is just kind of meant to mean grandmother witch.
Okay. Interesting.
Right?
I love evil wood nymph. Like, when did the nymphs
Yeah,
become evil, guys? Come on.
I don't know. I don't know.
Mm.
So Baba Yaga possesses a duality, right? She's almost a
Mm.
heroine sometimes. Sometimes she's a villain. A lot of times she's a villain.
Mm.
um, she is ambiguous and cunning and commands fear and respect, awe and desire. She's
Sounds
just
cool to
like,
me.
yeah, she's this dual figure. And she is 100% an elemental force. She doesn't really
Mm.
have any definable intentions. She does terrible things, but she is willing to help those who prove themselves. And
Ah.
if you think about even the house itself, with like its
Mhm.
gnarled pair of chicken legs, is an
Mhm.
elemental
Yeah.
force of its own, right? Like it is believed to be alive as much as a hut can be alive. It possesses its
Mm.
own personality. It roves around the forest, like, potentially seeking out those who need the Baba
Okay.
Yaga.
I've always
So, like,
wondered what that was all about, the feet.
I,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think it's like an
Okay.
elemental force.
That's so
And
cool.
inside, the Baba Yaga is often depicted at a spinning wheel, and originally the thread
Oh.
is from the innards of the dead. And some say
Ooh.
that her teeth and nose and breasts are made of iron, and that her hair is this knot of writhing snakes. So she's like depicted in this really gruesome kind of way, but she also has this gift of prophecy and can impart great wisdom.
I was gonna say the spinning wheel thing is always connected to prophecy and fortune
Hmm.
telling, and it feels like a collection of a lot of things that have been she sounds in a way like from what you're saying like a collection of a lot of these things of women that have gotten vilified through history, right? Like even the
Exactly.
snakes. Yeah.
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 Hi,
She sounds
Medusa.
cool. I'd
She
hang
sounds
with
really
her.
cool.
Yeah.
um,
Just don't be a dick about it and you'll probably be fine.
well, that's just it, right? So if you wish to benefit from Baba Yaga's gifts, you have to go through a bit of a journey first to find her,
Mm,
and
mm,
then she's going to test you. And you
okay.
have to be able to survive her demanding tests and tasks, and you also have to answer her questions correctly. So, yeah, she's like she'll help you out, but you have to do a bunch of stuff and prove yourself first. And that means that you have to answer
Interesting.
questions correctly, and then you have to
Mm,
do all of this stuff. So, one of the most famous stories in which Baba Yaga appears is in a story called Vasilisa the Beautiful. And it's
mm.
a Cinderella like tale in
Oh,
that
interesting.
Vasilisa is living happily with her mother and father
It's
until
a
she's about
gorgeous
8
name.
years old. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's really nice. And I don't know
It's
if I'm
really
saying
pretty.
it correctly, but that's how I'm going to say it.
But I like the way you're saying it. It's pretty.
Cool. um, so she's living happily with her mom and dad until she's about 8 years old, at which point her mom falls ill, and
Oh,
her mom is on her deathbed, and calls Vasilisa over, and she gives her this magical doll to help her throughout her life, and
okay.
tells Vasilisa that she must always keep the doll with her. She must keep it secret from everyone else, and she must offer it food and drink whenever she's facing some challenge in order to receive help.
Oh, interesting.
So, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, there's a magical doll involved, which is kind of cool.
You've got to feed it. It sounds like an offering, right? Like,
Exactly.
mhm.
Exactly. So she does this. She carries it around with her, keeps it secret with her, keeps it safe. No one knows about it. And after her mother's death, her father, like shortly after, marries a woman with two daughters,
Wow,
and
it's really Cinderella.
they are all envious of her beauty, and they give her a lot of difficult tasks and chores to do, and they abuse her really. And her father doesn't really know that any of this is going on. He's often away on business trips. So he
Shocking.
just has no clue. And Vasilisa is always able to accomplish these tasks, but only with the help of her doll. So she just always has it on her. She keeps it sacred at all times. And because of this, this doll does these tasks. So if she has to, like, I don't know, clean up the embers and sweep up the chimney, but she's having difficulty with it, she'll feed the
The
doll,
doll is
and the doll
actually
will do it for her
oh,
and, like,
cool,
offer
wild,
her
and weird.
advice and, like, lead her along certain ways if she asks the doll for advice. So, like, this is a really magical creature, and it's helping her out a lot.
And I can already feel the spook in it. Like, it feels kinda spooky a little bit, like, because what we know of as animated dolls can
Is
be
Chucky?
well, Chucky, like, all kinds of nothing usually nothing positive, but this doll sounds cool. Just the
No, she's
idea of a
pretty cool.
doll being animated is kind of like there's a scare in connection to
Yeah.
most things that we know, but
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
this one. This one's just
No.
magical.
Yeah.
Neat.
She's just a magical doll.
Cool.
Um, so once Vasilisa and her stepmothers reach the age where they're supposed to be married, the stepmother refuses all of Vasilisa's suitors, telling them that she cannot be married until her older sisters find husbands first. Because, Vasilisa's beautiful. She's getting all the suitors. The older sisters are getting diddly squat. So they really don't like her. And in hopes
Yeah.
of getting rid of Vasilisa, her stepmother keeps sending her into the woods to complete different errands. And one day,
Wow. How interesting. Sorry. That's really interesting. Oh my god. Because it sounds like Little Red Riding Hood stuff almost.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
one day, and this is like, there's so many versions of the story. So in some, they say that this is done accidentally and foolishly, and others, they say that this is done intentionally. But the stepmother puts the fire out, and there's no way for them to relight the fire. So she sends
Oh.
Vasilisa directly to Baba Yaga's hut to ask for fire. And she's trying to figure out how to get there. And, she asks her doll, and the doll hops up and down and, like, points the way and kind of tells her where to go
Mm.
and navigates to find her way there. And on the way, she sees three riders on horseback kind of dash past, and they're dressed in white, in red, and in black. And she kind of just files that away
Mm.
for later. And she's like, that's weird. Like, where are they going? And they're
Mhm.
kind of like just dashing past her. So she files that away, and she arrives at Baba Yaga's hut just before nightfall and is greeted by the Baba Yaga, who comes down in her mortar and pestle
Mm.
and demands to know what she wants. So she says that she's come for fire. And the Baba Yaga is like, why should I grant you this request? And so she kind of like secretly, I don't know, it kind of seems like she also has this telepathic communication with the doll in some way, because she
Mhm.
asks the doll without Baba Yaga being able to notice. And after consulting her doll, Vasilisa replies, because I ask it. And so Bubba is really surprised by this, and she tells the girl that that is the correct answer.
Oh,
Where she's
wow.
like,
She's
"What are you
gotta
doing
claim it.
here?"
Yeah.
Yeah, because I ask it.
Interesting.
So she's like, "Yeah, that is the correct answer." So she allows Vasilisa inside the hut and agrees to give her fire if she performs a bunch of tasks. But if
Oh,
she
boy.
fails, she will be eaten.
Eaten.
So,
Boy.
yes. So
Wow.
again, you see like this complex duality happening with Baba Yaga where you're like, you have to do stuff
She
for me.
seems cool,
If you
but
don't do it
don't eat the
properly.
child, yeah.
So she assigns Vasilisa these impossible tasks, which she's able to accomplish with the doll's help. And she essentially
Phew.
becomes a servant of the Baba Yaga for days. Like these
Oh.
tasks take days to do. And,
Mm.
you know, she in I don't even remember exactly what all of the tasks are because there is a lot of them, but she has to make a feast for 12 people and she has to like clean this and do that, like just like a bunch of stuff that takes days. So she's there for days.
Oh,
And
that's so cool. Try not to say interesting, but it's really, really is though.
so she accomplishes these tasks with the doll's help, is there for days, and
Intriguing.
she's looking around and starting to notice a bunch of things, and she becomes curious. And the Baba Yaga, depending on what version again, kind of warns her that too much knowledge makes a person old before their time, or in other versions,
Wow.
say not every
Mm,
question leads to good. So,
also
but she
very
allows
deep.
Vasilisa to ask questions, which is like,
Mm.
again, it's kind of like a test. So she asks about the riders that she saw during her travels, and she is told that they are day, rising sun, and twilight, and they live within the
Oh.
hut, and they go forth each morning and bring the day to the world, and then they come back.
Oh, wow.
So when Vasilisa thinks to ask more question, the doll stops her, and the Baba Yaga then asks, like, "Do you want to know more?" She says no. And Baba Yaga asks how she got to be so wise at such a young age because she would have expected the barrage of questions to come, which would not have been a good thing, right? Like
Yeah.
Baba Yaga would have then been pissed off. So
Yeah.
she's like,
You don't
how
wanna
did
piss her
you
off.
get to be so wise at such a young age? And she replies that her mother's blessing enabled her. And then Baba Yaga freaks out because absolutely no blessings of any kind, nothing blessed is allowed in the hut. And she tells her to leave.
Oh, boy.
But
Oh, boy.
she sends her off with one of those skulls that she has around the perimeter. And these skulls contain a fire because
Okay.
she did pass all of her trials. So she sends her off with a skull, but she's like, you got to get out. You can't stay here. Get the fuck out.
Whoa!
Nothing blessed can be in this house. Um, but she keeps her word. Vasilisa like completed all the trials. She didn't ask an obnoxious amount of questions. She asked a very poignant question, which tells us a little
Mm.
bit more about what Baba Yaga actually controls, right? And like
Mm.
how she brings day to the world.
Mhm.
And so she's just like, okay, great. I'm going to go home now. And she starts going home and she's looking at this skull and it kind of casts this unearthly glow and it freaks her out. And she wants to throw it away. But then the skull speaks to her and
Of
says,
course it
don't be
does.
afraid. Everything will turn out fine. Again, she's been gone for days at this point, and her stepmother and stepsisters think she's probably dead. They're stoked about this.
They're living it up.
They're living it up. They're like, "Yes, she's finally dead."
Baba Yaga ate her.
Yeah. When she arrives and arrives with fire, they are shocked and really disappointed and like pissed off. And they get back to treating her like shit. And the skull is just there.
Interesting.
It has the fire in its head, but it's watching how terribly the family is treating Vasilisa. And that night, it burns the stepmothers and sisters to ash.
This is like a twisted take on a fairy godmother if I ever heard one.
But that is the story.
That's
That's the
amazing. That's
story.
such a cool story, actually. I
It's a
feel like
really
I
cool
see so
story.
many I see little traces of all these other little, stories, but I don't know if
Yeah,
those stories came out of this one or vice versa or whatever, who cares? But
I
it's
don't
such a good
know.
story. Oh my
It's such a good
gosh.
story. And like you see in the story, the Baba Yaga acts as this catalyst for transformation. And like you have
Mm.
this magical doll who performs these impossible tasks. and the Baba Yaga who assigns them and who warns the doll or the doll warns Vasilisa against asking too many questions. And then she's provided with this magical skull that sets her free from her stepmother's cruel
And
tyranny,
just
really.
just burns them and not the whole house, so she still
Yes.
has her
Yeah,
own.
because
Okay.
it is like this sentient magical being, right? Like it was
Yeah.
talking to her and being like, "Don't worry, everything will be fine.
But
I know I
also,
look
I'm just
scary,
so
but I'm not so
curious about
bad."
this puppet, like this doll. I'm so curious
I
about this
know.
doll. Like, it's so
Yeah,
interesting because that doll is like, "Wha I wanna know more about the origins of this doll."
I know.
And the skull
Well,
also, actually.
yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting because,
Oh.
well, I'll say one more thing about the Baba Yaga in that, like, in essence, the Baba Yaga really exists in a lot of cultures, in a lot of different stories. You
Mhm.
have a Baba Yaga-like
A lot of people.
character
I've
that,
met
yeah,
that
that
person before.
yeah.
More than once.
But yeah, and symbolizing the unpredictable and, like, really untamable nature of the female spirit of Mother Earth
Mm.
and of this relationship to women and the wild,
Mm.
right? So that's, like, all I'll say about that. But then I'm gonna, like, get back to later versions because that was a relatively early version of the story.
Mhm.
In later versions of the tale, it's more the redemptive power and charitable works rather than the mystical power of the doll and skull that are highlighted.
Oh,
So in
interesting.
1916, a version that was included in old Peter's Russian Tales, um, yeah, the stepmother sends her off to go see the Baba Yaga, but wraps some stale bread and chicken scraps in a handkerchief for her journey to visit the Baba Yaga. And when she arrives, she notices a servant of the Baba Yaga is standing in front, crying bitterly, wiping tears on her petticoat. And
Oh.
Vasilisa takes out the handkerchief, empties the scraps and the bread into her pocket, kind of shakes it out, and then gives the handkerchief to this servant. And then she sees, and like the servant dries her tears with it, right? And then she sees next to the hut a really wretched looking dog, and she reaches into her pocket and gives the dog the chicken scraps, the kitchen scraps, and the stale bread. And the dog hadn't eaten in a really long time, and neither the dog nor the servant girl had experienced these acts of kindness before.
Oh.
And later, they actually help Vasilisa to escape from the Baba Yaga. So all of a
Oh,
sudden, the Baba
interesting.
Yaga is this more menacing figure. There isn't really much of a magical doll that's mentioned. Um,
Hmm.
the magical stuff basically disappears from the
Interesting.
story, and
Interesting.
it
Oh, that makes
becomes
it more
these
fun though.
charitable. Yeah, I know. But
Yeah.
Christianity makes it so that these charitable
Mm.
acts are really at the forefront in later stories.
That is so cool.
I know, it's a cool story, right?
It's a very, very cool story, and also I'm just, like, interesting how it changes to kind of like, the narrative is still that the girl, Vasilisa, she's still a good, virtuous girl, but all of
Mhm.
those other elements kind of, like, disappear, and I also
Yeah.
feel like there's a little bit of, like, Hansel and Gretel energy in this story with, like, the house and the eating of the children and the but it also makes me wonder, like, is a story like this created because of a stereotype of a certain type of woman? Like,
I
are
mean, isn't
I
that the
mean,
question we've been asking the whole time?
yeah, like, we've yeah, I guess so. We vilify women at a certain age, like, once they're old in almost every story. You never see, like, a nice old lady, maybe, like, fairy godmother, but again, that's pretty recent. Otherwise, they're usually, like, these evil kind of, like or you we say crone and we just automatically associate it to evil crone, but crone doesn't necessarily mean evil, you know what I mean? So
No,
it's like it's really
crone
cool.
definitely doesn't necessarily mean evil.
It just means
And
old.
it just means old. I mean, some scholars have actually kind of linked Baba Yaga to more of a trickster character, kind of like when you think of
Okay.
Loki as a famous trickster character of the Norse
Yeah,
god.
I could see it, yeah.
You
I could
know,
see
like
why.
she plays the villain, but she can also offer assistance. You know, she still helps Vasilisa like and frees her from the clutches of the evil step family. And she's really dangerous to deal with, like anyone who kind of operates on more of the shadowy side of the law.
Mm,
They're
yeah,
difficult and kind of shady to deal with. You even see that in contemporary movies where but she can
yeah.
prove to be like this invaluable ally in dangerous circumstances. And so
Mhm.
in this way she complicates the passive female nurturing role with like this I'm going to do whatever the hell I want outlaw power role that you normally see associated with men.
Yeah. But it's true that like in reality all women embody those certain things, and especially when
Of
women
course.
are fed up with society and fed up with bad treatment, they become like more and more rigid, and they care less and less about like, that's generalized statement, but they can
Mhm.
be more and more just like, this is the way things have to be done. You follow that. I don't have time for other things. So it's interesting to see that like embodied in a character, in a witch character like this. She seems like a really complex character. And on one hand, I think she's fascinating. On one hand, I'm actually scared, like genuinely scared of her, because I feel like
But this is
I've
just it.
experienced that woman in real life, and I know that it's not a game.
It's
It's
not
not
a
a
game, no.
game.
No, but
No.
that's just it. She inspires like this awe, but also fear, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a real duality with her. And she still does seem kind of like a weird fairy godmother. Like she still completes the stuff and the doll is a fairy godmother in a way.
Mhm.
100%, but also sending this skull and you wonder like the skull is sentient, right? But is it the skull
Right.
that's fully sentient or is it Baba Yaga like watching from the skull? You don't really know. That's never
Mhm.
really made clear if it's just like a reporting back. So I don't know. It's weird. She kind of crosses this wicked witch trope with the fairy godmother trope to be
I
like
love it.
ultimately
I
like create a very unpredictable and powerful role, like more powerful than either of those.
Maybe that's why, like, to this day, I actually have to admit, if I'm being honest, part of the reason why I've never really gotten into like that whole story, like the Baba Yaga thing, is because it's not that I thought she was evil, because I don't actually believe in that, but there is something about her that makes me a little bit nervous. But I also feel
Mhm.
like she kind of embodies this like certain energy of like, um a woman who is ultimately like frustrated or fed up or or just done, or just not catering or not pandering to anybody, and that can feel,
Mhm.
we're kind of trained to perceive that as a threat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
cool. It's very,
I
very
think
cool.
I think the character itself is
It's
also
very
a
real in a lot of
it's
ways. It's
very real, but
incredibly
I think
real.
it's also a reflection on society at the time because at that
Mm,
time you would
probably.
more more than we are accustomed to now, I think. You would really have to face certain initiations to move through stages of life.
Right.
Like if you're moving from childhood to adulthood or like in terms of work like becoming a member of a guild, you had to be called upon from a leader in your community and you would probably face some sort of tests that were given to you by elders, and this is more so in rural communities, I would say. You would like
Mm,
be given these tests from elders to see if you were truly prepared for this new role. And so these elders were guides and mentors, and the tests were not meaningless exercises. They were important trials to prove that the initiate was actually worthy of taking on this new status and simultaneously like challenging them in the ways that they are supposed to demonstrate themselves and that they were capable of doing more than they thought they were. And in a way, Baba Yaga kind of prepares people for this role because she's constantly all about the questions and challenging.
yeah. That ideology, actually, I still see remnants of that exist in France to this day with
Of
the
course.
craftsman guilds. Like that, when you were just describing that, that's like exactly what, more or less, what Michael had to, who is my
Yeah.
husband, sidebar, had to go through when he was becoming a menuisier, was
Yeah,
at
I
certain point
remember
they
him
have like,
telling me all about that. It was really, really fascinating
but I
because it
never
is
connected
still
that when you said it, when we talked about that with you.
Mhm.
I didn't have that idea in my head that that maybe was a way that societies operated a long time ago. I never even thought
It
of that.
only came into my head when I was researching this, where I was just like, "Oh, this makes perfect sense," because it was
That's so
guild
interesting.
societies, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like I've definitely gone through initiations in my life like that were not starkly obvious initiations like that, but I've had like every major shift in my life has usually been preceded by a figure that came into my life and was exactly, and I think that actually might be why the Baba Yaga thing makes me uncomfortable, because it was exactly
Mhm.
that. It was a nurturing that then developed into very like unsafe kind of situation, and that happened
Yeah.
multiple times with me. And so maybe that's why Baba Yaga kind of it hits too close.
It hits too close, yeah. But I think it is, like,
That's so
also,
cool.
like we mentioned before, like, the Baba Yaga is very much a personification of nature, of this wild woman
It's really
that
cool.
can do, like, whatever she wants, and, like, she is in a very powerful role in that case.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. It really does. It gives a really interesting kind of insight into that other side of things. Like I said earlier, like you said earlier, we tend to look at nature, for example, but many things in our society as all good or all black or all white, and
Mhm.
not in these like gray areas where this context, this story has a lot of diversity within it in terms of
Mhm.
like what you would consider good or bad or whatever, and that is actually way more realistic and it's way more present in like the natural the natural world than what we're used to. It's very, I'm going to have a deep think about this.
Oh, yeah, it gets better. You ready?
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
No, 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 it gets better because, in some folkloric traditions, it is also said that the Baba Yaga has 2 other sisters who are also Baba Yagas who live in her hut, and then Baba Yaga becomes a triple goddess in this fashion, embodying maiden,
What?
mother, and crone. Another name for Baba Yaga is keeper of water of life and death.
Okay.
So, keeper of water of life and death. A common pattern that is encountered throughout like the myths of folklore is that when a hero is assassinated with a sword or by fire, they can be sprayed with the water of death,
Mm.
which instantly cures all of their wounds. Then they are bathed in the water of life, granting rebirth. So she is the keeper of that.
Oh, wow.
Kind of like another, yeah, very, very powerful. This like she is between again the lower world and the middle world. So
Mhm.
kind of like a Persephone that is
Yeah.
floating between worlds, right? And that's why
Mhm.
people kind of tie her back to that.
Mm.
And I had mentioned that she is surrounded by her hut surrounded by posts with skulls on them. In a lot of the stories, it says that there are 12 posts representing the time of passage, the 12 months through the year. And remember, those riders, she
Oh,
controls the day. So
right.
she's really important when marking passage of time, and is
It's really
also,
cool.
it's really, really cool. She is also supposed to be a very accomplished weaver, which is why she's
Yes,
seen at her wheel a lot. So she's
makes
weaving
sense.
time.
Yeah, okay. It's really, really interesting, and it's really cool, this whole part about her being like, it just really connects that whole earth element idea. Um and it just seems like a way more complete in a lot of ways, even though it's like a kind of like a legend we don't have a ton of information on. It seems like quite complete in the ideology of what it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
And like
Way more
and
complete
then
than the concept of like, let's say Gaia, for example,
yeah.
with the
Yeah.
what we know it today as Gaia, which is very much like nurturing Earth Mother, which is of
Yeah.
course a real element, but it's not like maybe not the full.
No, because Baba
part.
Yaga also encompasses this darkness, and it's
Yeah.
only through examination of that darkness that you can hope to be reborn. So it crosses it crosses your comfort zone. You visit your shadow self, right? Like you were talking about it previously. It's only when you visit the shadow world and kind of like connect with that dark side of yourself that you can empower yourself spiritually, that you can empower yourself psychologically and emotionally. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So it's you see it here too. So she's this like old crone guardian of the water of life and death, and in that she's this goddess of death and birth. And again, the seasons are cyclical. Autumn
Mhm.
and winter bring death, and then spring and summer bring renewal.
Mhm.
Um, so there's stories where she kind of sings while sprinkling corpses with water of life to get them to be reborn, and she's really scary to look at and is wild and untamed, but also can be kind if she chooses to,
Yeah. Basically,
right?
you gotta earn her trust or earn her good graces, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So she has this guise as a wise hag, and she sometimes gives advice or magical gifts to heroes in the pure of heart. But the hero or like the main figures in stories around the Baba Yaga often enter her domain searching for some sort of knowledge and truth, which wasn't
Mm.
necessarily the case in Vasilisa exactly.
Mhm.
But then she does have the opportunity to ask questions because she's Baba Yaga is just like all knowing and all seeing. She weaves time. She's a weaver. She's this guardian spirit.
Cool.
An arch chrome goddess of wisdom, death, bone mother. I don't know. She's like very wild.
She sounds cool as fuck.
Yeah, I know. I know. And she's got
And
these connections to the
I'm
triple
slightly
goddess
intimidated
and
as well. Which I think is probably a good way to approach the situation. I love it. I like it. And I think when, we've done a lot of exploring of these it's really intriguing because we've done a lot of exploring of these a lot of Roman and Greek kind of legends where things are just so compartmentalized. Goddesses
Mhm.
are so compartmentalized, and it's like the goddess of a nice fluffy thing, or it's a goddess of like something dark and heavy, when the reality is probably at one point, like, and before all of this division, they probably are all one and the same, right? Like,
Yeah.
because you can be more than one thing. And if
Yeah.
anything in this series, if you should take away anything in this series, if you're a girl listening to this, it's like you can be more than one thing. You can embody all of
If
these
you're
things.
anyone listening to this, I think like
Yeah.
anyone at all, you can be more than one thing. Whatever society has laid out before you, you can be more than that.
Yeah, you're
It's
right.
okay.
That's inclusive of everyone. You're allowed to be like the full diversity of yourself, no matter who you are.
Yeah.
And trying to like decompartmentalize you into one idea or one thing or one niche, which our society loves to do, is
Mhm.
kind of bullshit. So don't do, like, you don't have to subscribe to that. If we could actually break that in our society over the next like 100 years or so, that would be awesome.
Wow. That'd be so cool.
Yeah.
I'd love to come back and visit as like a little water nymph when
A
that
sentient
happens. I don't know.
skull, a sentient skull of
I
knowledge.
mean,
I'd
oh, can
love
you
to help
imagine?
you burn your oppressors.
Be sweet. And yeah, it's so
You're
interesting
like,
that
"Yeah,
these
I would
magical
love that."
I would love that. It'd be really, really cool. It'd be creepy
I'm
as
not
fuck. And
against it.
again, I'm like,
You'd be on
is
board.
the skull its own magical sentient thing, or is Baba Yaga watching and deciding like, okay, or does she provide this gift and just trusts that the skull will do the right
Yeah, I'm
thing?
very
And like
curious to know more about the skulls, but I realize that there's
the
not
skulls
always
and
so
the
much.
magical dolls. I'm like, what is
There's
happening
gotta
here?
be some, like, maybe, like, there's gotta be some maybe symbolism to that that maybe we just don't know because those are not
Very,
really.
very possible because they are in the older tales, which are harder to find now. They've
Mhm,
become a little harder to find, and the
mhm.
Christianized versions are the most recent. So
Stop it with that.
I know,
I
right?
mean, like, one thing I've noticed from doing all these explorations is, like, first of all, Christianity didn't invent the wheel. Like,
No,
it,
gosh, no.
they didn't invent the wheel on any of this stuff, but we lose a lot of these really cool extra details because of their implementations and because of
Mhm.
the ways that they changed and shifted things. So that part kind of, it's good that we still have
Blows.
some record, but yeah, it would be cool to. Well, I think ultimately what's going to happen is, especially now with people, the way we are in society, we all kind of feel, a lot of us feel the same. Not all of us, but many of us feel the same, and we're trying to find ways back to that stuff. So, I mean,
Mhm.
uh, forgotten but not lost, maybe
Yeah, yeah,
being
I agree with
rediscovered.
that.
Yeah,
A lot of things are being rediscovered for sure. But
yeah.
yeah, that is some more information on Baba Yaga, because I was always kind of confused by this character and I didn't ever really do a deep dive. I really, really wanted to learn more because I've been so fascinated and I continue to be fascinated and perplexed and wanting to know more. So there you go.
Yeah, me too. I still want to learn more actually. So that's so cool. Very interesting. Fantastic story. Great story.
Yeah, it's a
Maybe
great
might be
story.
one of my faves so far actually.
Yeah, because
I
it's
just
just
I just
so
really like, you can see
unpredictable
so
and
many.
unlike. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's parallels to things that we've heard of before. But it's told in a way that's really unlike anything else that we've heard before, which is
The
really cool.
older we get into stories, we start to realize that stories, we follow an arc in in modern storytelling follows a
Mhm.
certain arc, but like the closer you get, the deeper you get into like a cultural story that's really reserved or preserved from the actual culture, they often don't have those kinds of arcs. They can kind of just go in
Mhm.
any which way because they're just meant to take in, they're meant to receive new information and share new information with the listeners based on what people are learning as they're going, right? So they add things
Mhm.
to it and they add something from there and so and it doesn't necessarily have a structure. I love a good structured story arc and I get why we do it that way and it makes a lot of sense, but I also think it's really cool to just hear these stories where you're not really sure like what that's there for.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
okay. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool.
Um thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and I think we're moving on. Are we moving on?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Does this mark the end of the season
I
of The
think
Witch?
it
I'm a
does.
little
I
bit
think it
sad for
marks
this
the
season
end
to
of the
be over.
season. So stay. Well, you can always come back. There's like so much stuff that we could do with witch trials, even.
Yeah.
But
Oh, for
we'll
sure.
revisit this topic again in a different way. But
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
stay tuned for the next season. You'll have to come back to listen to figure out what it is.
Yeah, we'll keep it a surprise for now. Like we know what it is, but we don't want to tell yet. So
We'll see you next time.
we'll see you. Thank you guys so much for listening to the Allegory Story. And like usual, if you want to email us at allegorystory@gmail.com. Find us on Instagram, Allegory Story Podcast. Sorry, it's Allegory Story Podcast for both Gmail and Instagram. Find
Yeah.
us there. And, we're always looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah. Give us a like. Do all the
Yay.
things. So awkward about this. Anyways,
Yeah,
see you
I'm
next
I'm
time.
fine with it, but yeah, we'll work on it, Mel. We'll work on it.
Bye.